My son forged my name on a federal loan document, drained $90,000 from the equity in my home, and when I confronted him at my own dining room table, he and my daughter-in-law drove me sideways into the kitchen counter and left me bleeding on the floor and walked out to the car they had bought with my money. Before I lost consciousness, I dragged myself 6 feet across cold tile and made one call. That call didn't just save my life. It dismantled everything they thought they had built. My name is Amos Briggs. I am 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a licensed building contractor in Tennessee, and I own my home the same way I built everything else in my life, completely without a dollar owed to anyone. This is the story of how I destroyed my own son's future, and why I have not lost a moment's sleep over it. Before I get into all of it, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you believe that a man who raises a child, puts a roof over their head for decades, and opens his home when they need it deserves better than what I received. Because what I received was the most expensive lesson of my life, and I am going to tell you every single detail of it, so you understand exactly how it happened and exactly how I ended it. My son moved into my house with his wife 22 months before everything fell apart. They had a story prepared, which I understand now, because people who plan to take something from you always prepare their story first. He told me his employer had let him go in a round of budget cuts. That was half of the truth. The other half was that his departure had been strongly encouraged by a client complaint. A retired couple who claimed he had steered them into an adjustable rate mortgage product that wasn't appropriate for their income or their timeline. High commission, high risk, wrong fit. My son had been a licensed mortgage broker for 11 years. He was skilled at presenting numbers in a way that made unfavorable arrangements look like opportunities. I did not know, when I handed him the key to my guest suite, that he had been practicing this skill at home. I gave them the room at the end of the hall. 2 rooms, a private bath, a walk-in closet. I told him to take whatever time he needed to find the right next position. I paid the utilities, the internet, the groceries. His wife worked in medical billing and brought in a salary, but nothing from either of them went toward the house. I didn't ask for anything. He was my son. That was the kind of thinking that eventually cost me $90,000 and a set of cracked ribs. The first sign came around month 8. A credit card statement arrived in my mailbox, addressed to me at a post office box in Nashville that I had never used. The card had been opened in my name using my social security number. I canceled it the same afternoon and called my attorney, Perry Wachtel. Perry has handled my business contracts for more than 20 years. He is the kind of man who does not tell you that you're overreacting, because he considers it a waste of both your time. He told me to start keeping records of everything. So I did. I photographed my mail before I opened it. I reviewed my bank statements line by line each week. I pulled my credit report every month. 3 months after the credit card, Perry recommended transferring my home into an irrevocable living trust. He framed it as sound planning for a man my age, which it was, but we both understood there was a second reason. If someone was attempting to access what I owned, they would find it considerably more difficult than they expected. The house was transferred into the trust without ceremony. It was no longer held in my name. I did not mention this to my son. The HELOC appeared 6 weeks later. A home equity line of credit for $90,000, recorded as a lien against my property at a regional bank I had never done business with. My signature was on the application. I had not signed it. I sat at my kitchen table for the better part of an hour, looking at the scanned document on my laptop, letting the geometry of what had happened arrange itself. A licensed mortgage broker would know exactly how to process a fraudulent HELOC application. He would know the documentation requirements where the verification gaps in the lending process typically sat, the correct sequence to get a lien recorded without triggering early scrutiny. He would know how to move the money once it arrived. I called Perry. He called a forensic accountant before we ended the call. I want to be clear about why I waited 2 more weeks before confronting my son. A man who has already forged federal loan documents and relocated $90,000 is not going to respond to an angry confrontation by handing it back. He will deny everything and begin building a defense before your attorney has finished talking. So instead, I had a security camera system installed throughout my house. Ceiling-mounted, wide-angle, cloud-connected, backing up continuously to an off-site server. I told my son and his wife it was an upgraded alarm system. They nodded and didn't ask questions. People who are stealing from you rarely ask questions. Questions draw attention to the wrong things. The accountant's report came back in 8 days. The 90,000 had moved in 3 directions. A down payment on a rental property put under contract in my daughter-in-law's name, south of Nashville. 2 vehicle payoffs that covered the cars parked in my own driveway. And a large deposit into a joint brokerage account at a wealth management firm they had never once mentioned to me. They had been building something with my equity, a real estate investment, a portfolio, paid-off vehicles, a financial future constructed entirely from the value I had spent 3 decades accumulating. And they had done it methodically, quietly, while I stocked the kitchen on Sundays and asked nothing in return. I sat them down at the dining room table on a Wednesday evening in October. I placed a folder on the table and left it closed. I asked my son, in a voice I kept completely level, to tell me about the home equity line of credit. The silence lasted 4 seconds. His jaw tightened. His wife looked at her phone. Then he settled back in his chair and delivered the story they had clearly rehearsed. He had been managing my household finances on my behalf. He had identified an opportunity for my idle equity to generate a return. He had planned to tell me once the investment matured. He called it a favor. His wife nodded. She kept her eyes on her phone. I told him what he had done was federal bank fraud. I told him the property he had encumbered was no longer legally mine at the time of the application, which meant the lien was fraudulently obtained against an asset he had no standing to use as collateral. I told him I had the forensic accountant's report, that I knew where every dollar had gone down to the wire number, and that I had been in contact with my attorney for months. He went very still. Then he leaned forward and his voice dropped to something he probably believed was threatening. He told me that if I chose to make this a legal matter, he would contact Adult Protective Services. He said he had been documenting what he called my increasing confusion and memory lapses for the past several months. He said a guardianship proceeding would move quickly given his records. He said I would lose control of everything I owned. He said this to me calmly at my dining room table, in a house I had owned outright since before he graduated high school. My daughter-in-law was still looking at her phone. I stood up and told them both to have their belongings out by Friday. What happened next was very fast. My son came around the table. His wife stepped left. She shoved me hard from the side with both hands, while he grabbed my right arm and wrenched it behind my back, and between the two of them they drove me sideways into the kitchen counter. The granite edge hit me across the ribs like a swung bat. I went down, my head catching the cabinet door on the way to the floor, and I hit the tile and the room went sideways and I lay still. I heard my daughter-in-law's voice, flat, unhurried, the voice of someone who had rehearsed this moment, saying he's fine, he had a fall, we'll check on him when we get back. I heard my son step over my legs. I felt the air shift as he passed. The garage door rumbled. The car backed out. The house went completely quiet. The phone was on the counter above me, 6 feet up and 6 feet away. I did not panic. Panic is what happens when you haven't yet accepted the situation you're in, and I had accepted it the moment I hit the floor. I worked myself across the tiles slowly, using the cabinet handles as grips, until I could get 2 fingers on the edge of the phone and pull it down to me. I dialed Perry. He answered on the second ring. I told him I was on my kitchen floor, with what I believed were broken ribs and a head wound. I told him my son and his wife had assaulted me and left the premises together. I told him to execute every protective measure we had prepared and to call me an ambulance. Perry said 3 words, I have it. Then he went to work. The ambulance arrived in 12 minutes. 11 stitches along the left side of my scalp, 2 cracked ribs, a mild concussion. I was conscious through all of it. I remember lying in the back of the ambulance, looking at the roof paneling and feeling something I had not expected. Not rage, not grief, but a kind of deep, cold resolution. I had spent 6 months watching, documenting, and preparing, hoping the whole time that I was wrong about my own son. I was not wrong, and because I was not wrong, everything that needed to happen was already in motion. Perry had filed the criminal complaint with the Clarksville Police Department before I reached the emergency room. He had submitted formal reports to the Tennessee Department of Financial Institutions and to the National Mortgage Licensing System before the business day ended. My son's license was flagged for investigation while he was still driving. Perry had also sent certified notification to the bank that issued the HELOC, informing them that the collateral property had been held in an irrevocable trust at the time of the application, which rendered the lien fraudulently recorded. A bank's legal department, when it learns that a federally backed loan instrument may have been fraudulently obtained, does not move slowly. Their attorneys were on the phone within the hour, and the forensic accountant's full report had been forwarded to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, because a forged mortgage application on a federally regulated instrument is not a matter for state court. It is a federal matter. I spent 2 days in the hospital. A detective visited me on the second morning, a thorough and patient man who had clearly read the file Perry had submitted before arriving. He walked me through the incident with careful, unhurried questions. I told him everything from the beginning: the credit card, the HELOC discovery, the confrontation, the assault, the sound of my son stepping over my legs. I held nothing back and modified nothing. When I finished, he asked if I was willing to cooperate fully with the prosecution. I told him there was nothing I was more committed to. My son called me from my own house that evening, I answered. He kept his voice measured and careful, which told me he had spent the day calculating his options. He said we should handle things as a family. He said he was willing to discuss a resolution. He said he had made decisions he regretted. I told him I was still recovering and that we would speak soon. He believed me because he needed to. When a person has done what my son had done, the days immediately after are spent hunting for a version of events where the damage is contained. The hunting keeps them from noticing the walls. What he did not know, while he sat at my kitchen table running numbers, was this: his mortgage broker license had been suspended before noon that same day. His employer, a regional lending firm in Nashville, had received the licensing board notification and terminated his access to all company systems by mid-morning. Every commission in his pipeline, every client file, every pending deal, frozen. The fraudulent HELOC lien was being actively contested by the bank's own legal team, who had no interest in defending a federal fraud claim in open court. The rental property down payment was in dispute while the seller's attorney investigated the source of the funds. The brokerage account had been flagged by both the forensic accountant's report and the bank's compliance division. The financial infrastructure they had spent months constructing was being dismantled in hours, and he was sitting at my kitchen table completely unaware. On the third day, my daughter-in-law scheduled a walkthrough with a local real estate agent, intending to list the property. They believed, because they had downloaded quitclaim forms and convinced themselves that paperwork was sufficient, that they could move forward. The agent arrived at 11 in the morning, professional and cheerful in the way that real estate agents are, until the title search comes back wrong. My daughter-in-law walked her through the house, as though presenting her own estate. The agent ran the title search as standard practice. She came back to the kitchen with a different kind of expression. She asked my daughter-in-law to clarify the legal ownership of the property. My daughter-in-law produced the quitclaim form and delivered the story about my cognitive decline and voluntary transfer. The agent turned the tablet around. The county records showed the property had been held in an irrevocable trust for months prior to any of the documents my daughter-in-law was holding. A quitclaim deed can only convey the interest a person holds at the moment of signing. At the moment I had signed it, I had held no direct interest in the property whatsoever. The form was worthless paper. The agent left without discussion. My daughter-in-law stood in my kitchen and understood, perhaps for the first time, that the asset she had been treating as her inheritance was something she could not reach. Perry and I arrived at the house together 2 mornings later. I brought a cane I didn't entirely need yet. He brought his briefcase. My son and his wife were both home. They met us at the door, still holding their folder of downloaded forms, which told me the events of the previous week had not adjusted their thinking as much as I had expected. Perry set his briefcase on the dining room table, the same table where, 11 days earlier, my son had told me I didn't understand what I was dealing with. He laid out the real documents one at a time: the trust records, the FDIC complaint filing, the Tennessee Licensing Board's suspension letter, with my son's name printed at the top, the forensic accountant's report tracing every transaction. My son picked up the suspension letter. He read it twice. He set it down very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands are not entirely steady. My daughter-in-law began to speak. She said they had been making sacrifices on my behalf. She said the investment had been for all of us. She pressed the quitclaim form across the table and said the sensible resolution was for me to correct the trust paperwork and execute a proper deed transfer. She used the word sensible twice. Perry placed a small Bluetooth speaker on the table and pressed play. The kitchen camera audio filled the room at moderate volume. The impact of my body against granite, the sound of the floor. My daughter-in-law's voice, flat and precise. "He's fine. He had a fall. We'll check on him when we get back." My son's footsteps moving toward the door, the garage rumbling open. She stopped talking. My son sat down in the nearest chair. He was not the man who had stood in this kitchen 10 days ago and told me, with absolute conviction, that I didn't understand what I was dealing with. He was something much smaller. What happened next was something I had not fully anticipated. My son looked up from the table and pointed at his wife. He told Perry, loudly, his voice cracking, that the financial accounts and the HELOC application had been her idea. He said she had managed all of the documentation. He said he had gone along with it because she had pressured him. He said he had not intended for anyone to get hurt. My daughter-in-law turned on him with a fury that had apparently been building for some time. She told him he had processed the fraudulent paperwork himself, using his professional credentials and his license. She said it had been his plan from the beginning and that she had only done the bookkeeping. She said if he was going to sit there and throw her to the police, she was going to tell them exactly whose signature was on the application. They destroyed each other's defense right there at my dining room table, competing to be useful to a prosecution that already had everything it needed. Detective Hartnett arrived at 2:14 in the afternoon with 2 uniformed officers. My son was charged with felony bank fraud, forgery of a financial instrument, and felony assault causing bodily injury. My daughter-in-law was charged as co-conspirator in the bank fraud and as an accessory to the assault. My son tried to say something to me as they walked him through the front door. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I looked past him at the hallway, and the afternoon light coming through the window at the far end, and the house that I had owned for 26 years, that no document my son had ever touched came within legal reach of. I looked at that and I let him walk out without a word from me. My son was convicted on all 3 counts. He is currently serving a sentence of 4 years and 8 months in federal correctional custody, with 3 years of supervised release to follow upon completion. His mortgage broker license was permanently revoked by the Tennessee Licensing Board. The court's restitution order required full recovery of the $90,000, plus accumulated interest and my documented legal fees, returned to me in full. My daughter-in-law accepted a plea agreement, 18 months of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and a civil judgment that will remain attached to her credit and her record for the next decade. The rental property transaction was voided. The sellers retained the down payment as damages. Her employer in medical billing terminated her when the charges became part of the public record. The brokerage account was surrendered as part of the restitution order. I am still in this house. The trust is still in place. Because Perry is correct that it was sound planning regardless of what happened, and because I see no reason to undo something that worked exactly as designed. I repainted the kitchen last spring, a soft gray that I chose myself, the color my wife always wanted for it before she passed 11 years ago. I walk without the cane now. The ribs healed without complications. People ask me if there's grief in all of this. I tell them the honest answer, which is yes. I grieve the version of my son I believed in for far too long. I grieve the years I explained away the signs, the way I confused loyalty with attention. I don't know whether the man who stepped over my legs on that kitchen floor was always there, or whether something made him into what he became. Both answers are painful in different ways. I have stopped trying to settle it. What I know is what I did. When something felt wrong, I paid attention instead of dismissing it. I prepared before I confronted. I kept my attorney close and my words limited. I installed the cameras before I said a single thing at that table. And when the moment came, I let 31 years of patience and a cloud-connected security system do the rest. If something in this story sounds familiar to you, if there is someone in your life who makes you feel like you should be grateful for the very things they are taking, I am asking you to pay attention to that feeling, not next month. Now, document what you observe. Consult an attorney before you say a word to anyone involved. Protect what you have built before someone else decides your life is a resource available for liquidation. Blood does not guarantee anything. Love does not guarantee anything. But a properly structured trust and a decade-old forensic accountant with a clean track record will hold up in federal court every single time.